Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a woman. Her golden hair shimmers like pure gold, and the world holds its breath the moment she parts her lips to speak. Her name is Britney Spears. But if we were to look beneath that surface with the eyes of true wisdom, what was her reality? In truth, she was a prisoner trapped in a massive cage of a sensory-driven life, where the body and its sensations were the only things allowed to exist. The world did not see her as a human being. To them, she was a walking corporation, a glamorous printing press churning out dollars without rest. Her only goal was survival, by meeting the expectations of others. And her mode of existence was possession, a life defined entirely by those who claimed to own her. The profound question of the soul, "Who am I?" was buried deep beneath profit and loss statements and the tally of how many records she sold that day. She lived in total dependence on her environment and material things. Lavish mansions, private jets, countless jewels. But none of these could quench the thirst of her spirit. Instead, they only fueled an energy of deficiency, the constant, gnawing fear of losing it all. Her internal structure was simple but suffocating: emotions reacting to external triggers, sensibilities led by those emotions, and a body being worked to exhaustion. These three gears locked together, leaving no room for her soul to breathe. She was like a dancer forced to perform an endless routine in golden shoes that were far too small and agonizingly stiff. One day, her consciousness, her sense of self began to crumble. When we believe that we are merely what we think or what others think of us, we stake our very lives on the approval of strangers. To protect her title as the Queen of Pop, she fell into a pit of self-justification, trying to maintain a crumbling identity. The cameras of the paparazzi invaded even the sanctuary of her backyard. They sold her tears, her screams, and her distorted expressions as merchandise. She reached the absolute end of a life lived for the eyes of others. Her desperate self-interest, the simple human desire to be respected, was trampled again and again. The responsibility she felt to be a provider and a superstar became a massive boulder crushing her shoulders. When the weight became too much, her consciousness fractured, and in its place, a deep depression took root. Do you remember 2007, when she shocked the world by shaving her own head? The world pointed fingers and called her crazy, but in reality, it was a desperate scream from her soul. It was her final question: if I am not this blonde icon, will you still see me? But the world answered that question. Not with compassion, but with a cold, legal shackle, a conservatorship. And so, 13 years passed exactly 4,821 days. To the outside world, she still shone brightly on stage. Her Las Vegas shows were sold out, and she danced with the mechanical precision of a robot. People thought she was happy. But deep inside, negative emotions were pulling her energy inward, suffocating her. Sadness, fear, and the crushing guilt of not being able to protect herself. Her father used this guilt to control her. If you don't listen to me, you'll never see your children again. This was the most brutal torture ever inflicted on a human spirit. But remember, even this agonizing pain was part of a grand drama of growth. It was only by passing through this absolute darkness that she could finally discover herself, not as a body, not as an image, but as a soul. Those 13 years of cruelty were the time she spent preparing to throw off those tight shoes, and finally walk barefoot upon the earth. This was the hidden, sacred meaning behind her 4,821 days of silence. My friends, where does the sickness of the heart truly begin? It begins when our innate sense of self-worth is wounded. When that primal instinct to be respected and loved is cruelly trampled by another, the human spirit loses its way. Britney's father exploited this psychology with a calculated, cold-blooded brilliance. He didn't just lock her doors, he shackled her mind with guilt. He fired a barrage of arrows at her spirit every single day. You put your children in danger when you shaved your head, and you are an unfit mother. Under this constant assault, a healthy sense of responsibility was distorted into self-blame. Self-blame quickly crystallized into shame, which grew into a massive chain of guilt trapped tightly around her ankles. She began to believe she was a sinner. And because she believed she was a sinner, she accepted that she deserved to be watched, and that her father had every right to control her money. This was the first wall of her invisible prison. During this time, Britney's emotional state was in total entropy, a state of negative energy. In this state, energy no longer flows outward to the world, instead, it pulls inward, suffocating the self from within. Sadness pinned her to her bed. Fear silenced her voice, preventing her from crying out for help. Her father fed on her anxiety. If you don't listen to me, the court will take your children away forever. This single sentence was a dark spell that froze her very soul. Her will to create was effectively castrated. In place of the joy of creation, only forced labor remained. The dazzling shows in Las Vegas were, in reality, a tragic stage built by grinding her soul into dust. The psychiatric medication, lithium, forced upon her, numbed her intellect until she began to lose even her own memories. Her body was dancing on that stage, but her soul was already submerged in a sleep deeper than death. What is truly staggering is that all of this was carried out under the legal guise of protection. Her father forcibly placed a contraceptive device (IUD) inside her body. From a philosophical perspective, this was a physical destruction of the creative engine, the very core of human potential. Stripped of the right to conceive or create life, she was treated as nothing more than a material object, designed to generate revenue. Her father reversed the engine of her desires. You want to see your kids? Then get on that stage. He used the bait of her deepest needs to exhaust her physical body. She could not decide whom to meet, what to eat, or even the color of the wallpaper in her own home. She was in a state of total dependency. A soul that should have been independent and connected to its own essence was instead forced to beg for survival from the very person destroying her. The law stood by, allowing this tragedy to unfold under the hollow name of conservatorship. But remember, this true wounds cannot exist in the eternal spirit. Every agonizing event was, in fact, a role-play of love, designed for the growth of the soul. Even in that profound darkness, Britney's spirit slowly began to wake up. Why can I not buy a cup of coffee with my own money? Why am I forbidden from having a child with the person I love? These fundamental questions ignited her inner conscience, the engine that yearns for truth. The Free Britney movement, started by her fans, became a new source of information for her. The world is cheering for me. I am not alone. This positive energy from the outside began to cleanse her distorted memories. The moment she realized that the guilt she had carried for 13 years was merely an illusion created by her father, the walls of the prison began to crack. Now, her soul prepares to walk toward the final battlefield, the courtroom, for a magnificent recovery. Listen closely, my friends. Listen to the sound of dawn breaking after 4,821 long days of night. On June 23, 2021, the air in that Los Angeles courtroom was heavier than ever. But that weight was not the pressure of a cage, it was the gathering tension of a volcano about to erupt. Britney's conscience, the engine of her spirit that had been suppressed by medication and surveillance, finally began to find its voice. This conscience is the primal drive within us that yearns to know the truth. She finally saw clearly why she had been forced to suffer and realized that the power her father wielded was nothing more than a hollow, unjust illusion. She stood before the court via telephone and, for 20 minutes, poured out her truth without taking a breath. I am not a slave. I deserve to own my money, drive my car, and have a child with my boyfriend. This shout was more than a mere protest. It was an anthem of self-existence, the moment. A soul, long trapped inside the shells of the body and the ego, finally declared its presence to the entire world. As her testimony continued, the judge, the lawyers, and millions watching around the world held their collective breath. Her voice was no longer trapped in a negative state. The sadness and fear that had once pulled her energy inward, suffocating her, had been transformed into a powerful, positive energy that exploded outward. She testified in grueling detail about the lithium forced upon her and the violations of her physical autonomy. This was the process of cleansing her memory. The moment she dragged those hidden, self-blaming wounds into the sunlight, they lost their power to hurt her. I am not happy. I cry every day. This raw, honest confession awakened her true intellect. She discarded the desperate need for external approval and embraced a higher form of self-love, a noble determination to protect and nurture her own essence. It was this inner strength that began to sustain her. The battle in the courtroom was fierce. Her father's legal team still tried to weaponize her mental state, attempting to lock her back into the prison of her own mind. But Britney's intellect was now clear and sharp. She was no longer deceived by the logic they had spent over a decade constructing. Added to this was the Free Britney movement. The global outpouring of support stimulated her inner sensibilities. Messages like, "You are not alone," and "We love your spirit," became a profound source of healing. While the gaze of others had once been a poison, the support she received while connected to her own essence became food for her soul. Now, her creative spirit, the drive to do and create, was burning hot again. She chose not to be a doll on a stage, but a writer composing her own life and a driver steering her own destiny. In that moment, when her soul, her intellect, and her heart found perfect harmony, a massive hole began to tear through the fortress of the law that had stood firm for 13 years. Finally, on November 12, 2021, the judge declared, "The conservatorship is hereby terminated." Bang, bang, bang. Those 3 strikes of the gavel were the sound of the final chains breaking around her soul. Outside the courtroom, it was a festival of joy. Britney looked up at the blue sky and wept. This was not just a legal victory. It was a transformation of existence, the moment she finally threw off the tight, agonizing shoes of her public persona and returned to the noble soul she was always meant to be. She now drinks her coffee without asking for permission. She travels with those she loves using her own hard-earned money. The memories of the past 4,821 days are no longer wounds that destroyed her, but have been reinterpreted as the role play that forced her to grow. She now walks toward her final act, a life of true forgiveness and brilliant creation. My friends, is your soul free today? Britney's victory is the victory our own souls yearn for every single day. My friends, the chains have finally broken, and the doors have swung wide. For 13 long years, what imprisoned Britney was not merely legal paperwork. It was a profound hypnosis, the belief that she had to live according to the will of others. It was the illusion that her body and her fame were the sum of who she was. What was the first thing Britney did when she reclaimed her freedom? It wasn't returning to the glitzy stage. She took off her shoes and stepped onto the bare earth. She listened to the sounds of her own body and began to breathe in a place where no eyes were watching. We often live believing that our money, our social status, and our outward appearance are us. But Britney realized with her entire being that when all those things vanish in an instant, something remains, that essential life force, the true self. No longer a puppet for others, she stands before the world as the sole master of her life, in the naked truth of her existence. People often ask, how can she ever be compensated for those 13 years of injustice? They say she should spend the rest of her life hating her father and resenting the world. But to the eyes of one who has truly awakened, the world looks different. Britney no longer calls her suffering a victimization. She has come to realize that even that profound darkness, even the cold blade of power her father wielded, was, in fact, the most rigorous lesson she had to endure to discover who she truly was. We think we give and receive countless wounds throughout our lives. But the essential self can never truly be wounded. What we call scars are actually like rough waves that arrive to awaken a greater power within us. When she learned to ride those waves, she finally realized there was no one to resent and no one to hate. Everything was a part of a magnificent drama, designed to forge her into a stronger, more resilient soul. People often ask, how can she ever be compensated for those 13 years of injustice? They say she should spend the rest of her life hating her father and resenting the world. But to the eyes of one who has truly awakened, the world looks different. Britney no longer calls her suffering a victimization. She has come to realize that even that profound darkness, even the cold blade of power her father wielded, was, in fact, the most rigorous lesson she had to endure to discover who she truly was. We think we give and receive countless wounds throughout our lives. But the essential self can never truly be wounded. What we call scars are actually like rough waves that arrive to awaken a greater power within us. When she learned to ride those waves, she finally realized there was no one to resent and no one to hate. Everything was a part of a magnificent drama, designed to forge her into a stronger, more resilient soul. My friends, what is true forgiveness? Is it forcing yourself to understand and tolerate someone who wronged you? No. True forgiveness is reaching the state of realizing that there was never anything to forgive in the first place. The anger Britney once hurled at her father has now transformed into a quiet understanding. She realized that he, too, was a pitiful soul trapped in his own desires and fears. A person who knows exactly who they are cannot be shaken by the attacks of others. She no longer wastes her energy on resentment. Instead, she has begun to pour that energy outward. She shares her story with the world in her own book, giving courage to those who suffer similar pains. This is the shift from a life trying to fill a void to a life shared in abundance. Her life is no longer a record of suffering, but a creation of love. The scars remain, but they are now medals of honor that show just how powerful she has become. Hello, I'm Jung Kim, your legal partner. When Britney Spears stood in court after 13 years, she cried out a single, haunting sentence, "I just want my life back." The dramatic saga of the pop queen, Britney Spears, offers a profound awakening for us all. It serves as a brutal reminder no matter how much money you earn, or how much you trust your family, you must be the one to protect your own life and assets. Britney fell into the trap of a conservatorship, a legal cage that mirrors the vulnerabilities in our own society. Are we truly safe? Have you ever stopped to think if a sudden accident or illness leaves you unconscious or unable to make decisions? Who will manage your assets? Who will make the critical choices for your life? Most people think, "My family will take care of it." But as we saw with Britney, the greed hidden behind the name of family can lead to tragedies beyond imagination. This is where a powerful shield comes in: voluntary guardianship. Voluntary guardianship is a system where you appoint a guardian while you are still healthy and of sound mind. Through a legal contract, you define exactly what their role will be. Think of it as a living will for your autonomy. You decide, if I fall ill or lose my judgment, this person will manage my assets like this, and my medical treatments should follow this direction. My friends, voluntary guardianship isn't about a lack of trust in your children. It's about protecting your final dignity with your own decisions, rather than leaving it to chance. An unprepared old age is full of anxiety, but a prepared one is a blessing. I, Jung Kim, alongside the voluntary guardianship system, will help protect your proud and independent future. I hope today's story offered a helpful hint for your retirement planning. If you have questions, please leave a comment. Subscribing and liking is the first step in protecting your rights. Thank you.